Welcome to this journey into a history deliberately fractured, a story not merely forgotten, but actively buried beneath the meticulously manicured lawns and decaying grandeur of antebellum Georgia. I invite you now to step with me into the year 1841, a time of rigid, unforgiving boundaries, where silence was the first law, and defiance was a treason, punishable not just by the whip, but by the complete erasure of one's very existence from the historical record. Our subject is the Drayton Estate, a sprawling, feverish monument to cotton and cruelty. Its central manor a dazzling white facade that concealed 1,000 shades of moral compromise. Its grounds steeped in a strange, tense quiet that only the constant, humid drone of the summer insects dared to break. The air itself seemed to carry whispers and rumors, clinging like the suffocating, moss-draped humidity that made the simple act of breathing a labor. The official records, those fragments of documented memory that historians sift through like shattered glass, are predictably pristine, listing harvests, ledgers of human property, and the respectable comings and goings of the Drayton family, wealthy, pious, and utterly unblemished by public scandal. But it is always in the margins, in the accidental, almost spectral notations of the overlooked, that the unwritten truth lies waiting patiently for the light. What little is known about the events that convulsed the Drayton Manor that summer begins with a single peculiar entry found years later in a frayed and water-stained church baptismal register, a document tucked away in the deepest recesses of the St. Jude's Parish Archive, its contents otherwise utterly conventional. Beside the entry for Eliza, daughter of Master Jeremiah, and Mistress Sarah Drayton, a predictable notation of their firstborn child and heir, was scrawled, in a hand distinct from the clerk's neat copperplate, an almost illegible line: Adeline and Caleb, the unmentionable union. This anomaly, this shocking fact, amidst the relentless piety of the historical documentation, serves as our hook, our breach in the facade. Who were Adeline and Caleb? And why would Richard Thornton, the notoriously rigid parish vestryman, specifically protect one servant's existence with this damning whispered addition, one that clearly violated the very social, legal, and spiritual architecture of their world? The official history is a lie of omission. We seek the unspoken truth it was designed to conceal. This is where the investigation must begin, with a short, punchy, unvarnished fact carved out of the silence. The fragments of information concerning Adeline must be pieced together like shards of broken pottery. The plantation ledger, cold and transactional, lists her only as Adeline F. 20, house servitude, value $950, a piece of human property, an asset to be catalogued and accounted for, devoid of internal life or will. Yet, the scattered recollections of the Drayton's descendants, recorded in carefully edited and overly sentimentalized family histories, paint a vastly different, if still distorted, picture. They speak of Addie, a woman of sharp wit and quiet, defiant grace, who moved through the suffocating domestic spaces of the Drayton Manor, not with the expected subservience, but with an internal resistance that only the most sensitive observers could detect. A subtle yet profound irony woven into the very fabric of her daily life. The manor itself, with its peeling paint and silent, overgrown gardens, provided the perfect backdrop for this hidden drama, a stage where the opulent facade of the main house contrasted sharply with the hidden dark space of the slave quarters behind it. Adeline was the daughter of the master's cook, given a slight, almost negligible privilege that afforded her proximity to the family, allowing her to witness the very heart of their hypocrisy. Her labor was less grueling than the field hands, Yet it was a more insidious form of bondage, requiring the constant performance of invisibility and emotional control. She saw everything: the strained marriages, the illicit affairs, the constant low-level cruelties masked by religious observance. The very act of this observation was a form of silent rebellion, a gathering of evidence against her oppressors. And then there was Caleb. Caleb, the field hand, a man of profound physical strength and a fiercely guarded intellect, who worked the sun-scorched cotton fields until his back bent with exhaustion, and the very earth seemed to absorb his sweat and sorrow. Caleb was a man of boundaries, of clear, unmoving lines of moral certainty, in a world built on moral ambiguity. What little is known about his appearance speaks of a towering frame and eyes that held the foreboding look of a man who had seen too much and was willing to speak only in riddles, or not at all. The contrast between Adeline, moving through the polished, airless rooms of the manor, and Caleb, rooted to the soil under the relentless Georgia sun, was a juxtaposition that defined the estate's power structure. Their connection, a violation of every unspoken rule, a direct threat to the systemic oppression that sustained the Draytons, was forged in secret. Whispered meetings under the thick shadow of the cypress trees by the sluggish river, where the humid air carried not just the scent of mud and decay, but the electric tension of their forbidden love. What little is known about their meetings comes from the journal of a fellow servant, partially obscured by rot and fire damage, a diary page that mentions only 2 words: the oak, midnight. The fragmented narrative begins to build itself not on grand declarations, but on these fleeting, dangerous moments. Jeremiah Drayton, the master of the estate, was a man consumed by the peculiar monomania of his class, the absolute necessity of control. His piety was a shield, his wealth a demonstration of divine favor, but his life was an anxious, tense performance to ward off the constant, lurking threat of defiance from his property. The Drayton Manor, with its polished mahogany and heavy velvet drapes, was his psychological fortress, and any breach in its rigid order was perceived as an existential assault. The long, descriptive passages in his surviving letters to his attorney speak not of love for his wife or pride in his crops, but of the ceaseless paranoid effort required to maintain the illusion of order. "The silence must be kept," he writes in an urgent script, "the boundaries maintained. Should one stone fall, the whole wall is lost." His growing suspicion about Adeline was born not from any concrete evidence, but from the simple fact of her intellect and her proximity to his family. She was too close to the children, too privy to the financial secrets, too much a part of the household's inner workings to remain just a silent fixture. This is the pathetic fallacy at work. The humid air and the close, tense quiet of the summer were merely external mirrors of Jeremiah's internal terror. When Adeline's journal ends abruptly, a sudden, punchy stop to what had been a meticulous coded record of her life, it signals the moment when suspicion solidified into action. The entry before the silence is only 3 words: Caleb, the threat. Jeremiah's campaign to discover the unspoken truth and enforce the boundaries became an obsession. He employed a trusted overseer, Silas, a man of blunt, methodical cruelty, to watch the house staff, turning the house into a prison of surveillance. He knew, instinctively, that a love like Adeline and Caleb's was not just a moral lapse. It was a fundamental, revolutionary act that exposed the ultimate fragility of his power. It was the ultimate irony. The man obsessed with control was powerless against the quiet, persistent will of 2 individuals. The very environment, the silent garden, the shadows that stretched long and black from the cypress trees, became a character in the narrative, concealing their meetings while reflecting the foreboding mood of discovery and danger. We are building the narrative out of these fragments: a diary entry, a paranoid letter, the testimony of the landscape itself, the main events of the scandal that summer, the sudden, shocking fact that shattered the Draytons' respectable facade, hinge on a night of unexpected, yet meticulously planned defiance. The event was ostensibly the wedding of Jeremiah's younger brother, a formal, suffocating affair meant to showcase the family's wealth and piety. The manor was ablaze with lights, the air thick with the scent of lilies and expensive claret, a cinematic build-up to a moment of stark revelation. Adeline and Caleb used the cover of the chaos, the focus of the entire household, and its many guests fixed on the facade of respectability, to perform their own secret ceremony. The details are fragmented, gleaned from a later, reluctant court deposition given by a retired family nurse who was present that night. She spoke of a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of the smokehouse, a place of dust and spiders, where Adeline, having stolen a lace cuff from her mistress, met Caleb, who carried a single, wilting honeysuckle blossom. They spoke vows not to God, the nurse recounted, her voice shaking even decades later, but to the earth itself. This act was not simply a romantic gesture. It was a revolutionary declaration of self-ownership, a moral and spiritual union that rendered null and void the master's legal claim over their persons. The journal ends abruptly just days after this secret ceremony, confirming that the moment of profound joy was instantly followed by the looming threat of discovery. What happened next was documented in a series of increasingly urgent letters written by Jeremiah to his attorney, detailing a disturbing breach of order and a disappearance of property. The pivotal, shocking fact that sealed the master's paranoia was a simple, short, and punchy entry found in the main plantation ledger, a close-up of this key historical document being a critical visual cue for the viewer. Written not by Jeremiah, but by his distraught wife Sarah in a moment of emotional crisis, was the inscription next to Adeline's name: "Fled by the hand of God." The irony of this notation is palpable. Sarah, a deeply religious woman, attributes the loss of her property not to defiance, but to divine intervention, a subconscious admission of the injustice of their system and her own moral compromise. The official response, however, was brutal, a massive, immediate pursuit across the county. The juxtaposition of the opulent wedding celebration and the desperate flight of the lovers underscores the central theme of the narrative: the contrast between official piety and private cruelty. The script maintains a tense atmosphere, the slow burn pacing allowing the gravity of their decision to sink in. The environment itself became a central character in the manhunt, a silent, all-consuming entity that both threatened and protected the fleeing couple. The cypress swamps of coastal Georgia, with their dark, murky waters and cathedral-like canopy of trees, provided the necessary concealment and the perfect setting for a shadowy, foreboding historical reenactment. As the pursuit intensified, the visuals must focus heavily on the environmental imagery: the relentless, opaque darkness of the swamp, the low-hanging Spanish moss, the river itself, a silent witness to countless hidden cruelties. Adeline and Caleb were hunted not by dogs and guns alone, but by the very system designed to strip them of their humanity, a system Jeremiah Drayton deployed with the methodical fervor of a zealot. We weave the narrative out of fragments: a deputy's terse report filed with the local sheriff, a faded newspaper clipping offering a reward for the return of 2 runaways, and the aforementioned court deposition. The deputy's report provides one of the few sensory details of their flight. A faint trail of blood and torn cloth, lost near the old turpentine still. This short, punchy sentence introduces the element of danger and injury, ramping up the tense pacing. The rhetorical question is immediately posed. What little is known about her appearance, after 3 days of relentless flight? We can only construct an image of desperation and physical toll, a stark contrast to the Adeline who had moved with quiet grace through the polished rooms of the manor. Caleb, using his knowledge of the land, became their sole defense. But the constant rhythmic alternation between flight and hiding, between narrative exposition and the precise, cold recitation of historical facts, underscores the hopelessness of their situation. The pathetic fallacy is complete. The suffocating, dense environment reflects the suffocating weight of the historical oppression they were fighting against. Jeremiah's increasingly desperate letters, another set of historical documents that demand a visual close-up, detail the financial and reputational loss he faced, his primary concern being the maintenance of the boundaries and the suppression of the scandal. He was terrified that their successful escape, a true act of defiance, would become a beacon for others. The most disturbing revelation from this period is a line from Silas, the overseer, who wrote to his wife, "The master will see them killed before he sees them free. It's the principle, not the property." This single line provides a glimpse into the depth of the systemic hatred and moral depravity at the heart of the system. The main narrative focus shifts now to the aftermath of the pursuit, a period defined by silence and the active suppression of evidence, underscoring the historical conspiracy documentary style. The Drayton Ledger, that cold, transactional document, suddenly takes on a profound, terrifying significance. After Sarah Drayton's scrawled, emotional note, there is an unnerving stretch of blank space next to Adeline and Caleb's names. This is not just a gap in the record. It is the physical manifestation of their erasure from the historical memory. A visual of the ledger is crucial here, a close-up that highlights the unbroken white space, the silence that screams. The rhythmic pacing alternates between the psychological impact of this void and the factual attempt to uncover what filled it. The official story, disseminated through controlled whispers and a brief, dismissive notice in the local paper, was that the couple had been caught, returned, and immediately sold upriver, a phrase that, in the context of the time, carried the weight of a death sentence by separation. Yet, the unsettling lack of a sale entry in the ledger, which meticulously recorded every transaction, is the anomaly that exposes the conspiracy. Why would Richard Thornton specifically protect one servant? The rhetorical question returns, but now, a subtle, more academic piece of evidence is introduced, a land surveyor's map from 1845, 4 years after the flight, which marks a small, unmarked gravesite deep in the woods near the Drayton property line, a weathered headstone that serves as a subtle visual cue. The map's notation is terse and chilling, 2 stones, unclaimed. This is a deliberate, slow-burn revelation. It suggests not a sale, but a much darker, more violent end to their story, one that the Draytons were compelled, by social and financial necessity, to conceal. The use of fragmentation is key here. We build the narrative not on a single, conclusive document, but on the accumulation of 3 negative facts: no sale record, no concrete recapture report, and the existence of the unmarked graves. The judgmental, moralistic tone becomes prominent when discussing the irony, juxtaposition of the family's public piety with the private act of burying evidence of their violence. The very cobblestone streets of the nearby town, often referenced in the Draytons' social correspondence, symbolize the polished facade under which these grim secrets lay dormant. The identity of Richard Thornton, the parish vestryman who scrawled the unmentionable union notation in the baptismal register, is the key that unlocks the door to the moral core of the scandal. Thornton, an otherwise unremarkable man of middle means and rigid religious conviction, was a quiet member of the local community whose primary function was the meticulous maintenance of the church's records, a perfect witness for our deep-dive investigative narrative. His personal journal, miraculously preserved in the attic of a distant cousin and introduced here as a key historical document, is the necessary injection of emotional context into the cold, factual summary. Thornton's journal entries, read directly over a visual of his faded, cramped handwriting, reveal a man grappling with a profound crisis of conscience, torn between the legal requirements of his society and the moral requirements of his faith. "The lie is in the silence," he writes on a tense evening in late 1841. "To record only the master's birthright and omit the truth of their defiance is to assent to murder. I cannot." This is the moment of moral reflection, a deliberate move by the omniscient narrator to access the character's inner turmoil. The short, punchy sentences in the journal entries are used for maximum emphasis. They died, married. That is the truth. The law is a sin. Thornton's small, almost negligible act of defiance, the simple insertion of a single coded phrase into a church register, was a quiet, desperate attempt to prevent the complete fragmentation and erasure of Adeline and Caleb's existence. He could not save their lives, but he could save their love from being wiped clean by the historical memory. The grave emotional tone of this section is paramount. We understand that this act was a tremendous personal risk, a betrayal of his class and his community, undertaken not for fame or reward, but out of a simple, unyielding moral necessity. The narrative structure, which is chronological with flashbacks, pauses here to insert this vital piece of historical evidence, deepening the context of the anomaly introduced in the first part. It is the first hint of an emotional resolution in a story otherwise dominated by cold facts and systemic cruelty. The mystery reveal is now at hand, drawing upon the assembled fragments to construct the full, often darker, truth. The first conclusion is the resolved historical facts, presented with a slightly academic and definitive tone, relying on the evidence painstakingly gathered from the three primary sources: the Drayton Ledger's silence, Richard Thornton's journal, and the surveyor's map. Fact 1. Adeline and Caleb were not sold upriver, a transaction that would have yielded a substantial profit and would have been meticulously logged. Fact 2. The absence of a capture record in the local sheriff's office, combined with the extreme paranoia detailed in Jeremiah Drayton's letters, strongly suggests that the pursuit was not intended for recapture, but for termination. Fact 3. The unmarked dual gravesite on the property line, confirmed by the 1845 survey, corresponds precisely with the time of their disappearance. The journal ends abruptly because the lover's story was ended abruptly. The truth, therefore, is this: the master, fearing the revolutionary power of their union and the irreparable breach in the boundaries it represented, ordered their execution, most likely by his overseer, Silas, and then actively engaged in a historical conspiracy to erase every trace of their existence from the public and private record. This conclusion highlights the irony juxtaposition of the Drayton family's pious public reputation and the private, cold-blooded violence they employed to maintain their power. The rhetorical question shifts from "who were they?" to how many others were erased in this way. An open loop designed to maintain tension and broaden the moral scope of the investigation. The visual cues for this section shift to focus on historical documents, with close-ups of the ledger and the map, the precise recitation of historical fragments, reinforcing the investigative authority of the narrator. The humid air that carried rumors has now been replaced by the finality of the historical record, a foreboding transition from mystery to confirmed tragedy. The narrative now moves to the second conclusion, shifting from the resolved historical facts to the lasting emotional moral implications and the unsettling modern echo of the Drayton scandal. This section is characterized by a deliberate shift to a moral philosophical reflection, employing a poetic and evocative language style. The tragedy of Adeline and Caleb is not simply their death, but the deliberate attempt to murder their memory, to deny their union the dignity of documentation. This is where the repetition of key themes is most effective. Their story is a narrative built out of silence, fragments, and unspoken truth, a microcosm of the vast historical erasure that defines the record of the oppressed. What became of them is a question that now must be rephrased. What became of their love, their defiant will? The answer is unsettling. It became a silent challenge to the very idea of historical authority. The omniscient narrator now speaks directly to the deeper meaning of the macabre true crime storytelling. The real crime was not just the murder, but the subsequent historical cover-up, the systemic effort to make their existence null and their love illegal even in death. The text uses a long and descriptive style, building atmosphere. The humid air of the Drayton estate today may no longer carry the whispers of the overseer, but it carries the echo of their defiance, a profound, unyielding testament to the persistence of individual will against systemic oppression, a moral victory won in the hidden compartment of a smokehouse and sealed in the earth under the silent gardens. The story ends not on a factual point, but on a point of enduring moral weight. The master's fear, the reason for his violence, was ultimately justified. Adeline and Caleb, through their love, defied the boundaries of the system, and through their death, exposed its moral hollowness. Their defiance remains a challenge to us, the modern investigators, urging us to look beyond the respectable facade of the official historical record. We conclude with a final, dramatic invitation to the viewer, bringing the historical narrative into the present and leaving a final open loop for reflection. The Drayton estate, with its moss-draped squares and peeling paint, still stands today, a silent monument to a history of suppression and cruelty. The current reality is the ultimate irony. A respectable historical marker details the architectural significance of the manor, yet makes no mention of the unspoken truth that lies buried meters away near the property line. The direct invitation, rhetorical setup, returns. Before we close this case file, I invite you to leave in the comments what small, seemingly insignificant notation in your own history, what forgotten fragment, do you believe holds the deepest, most disturbing truth? The final reflection is grave and enduring. The history we inherit is often not the truth, but the story that the powerful could afford to tell. Adeline and Caleb, the master's daughter and the field hand, remain the unmentionable union, not because they are forgotten, but because their story is a wound in the historical narrative that has never been allowed to fully heal. Their legacy is the very existence of this investigative narrative, a testament to the fact that no lie, however meticulously constructed, can withstand the relentless excavation of the truth. Their courage, their awe-inspiring defiance, is the only true monument left standing. The journal ends abruptly, but their story, their secret Georgia union, continues to whisper from the shadows, urging us to question the silence. The final visual is a direct application of the user's saved image style preference, capturing the somber magnitude of this historical struggle. The investigation is closed. The moral implication remains wide open.